This is Tall Tale TV, your podcast for sci-fi and fantasy short stories. Curing Brian, written by Roger Ley, narrated by Chris Herron. The day started pleasantly enough. We'd met for our weekly game of tennis, the old Dependables, Chris, Marilyn, Malcolm, and me. The man in the dirty suit appeared, and everything changed. It was summer, and the weather was warm, so we'd used the outside court, the one next to the soccer pitch. We'd been playing for about 15 minutes when I noticed a guy staggering towards us over the field. When he finally arrived, he stood at the chain-link fence, staring through at us and smiling vacantly. His skin was pale, as if he'd been saved from drowning, but his lips were cherry red. Saliva slowly dribbled down his chin and dripped onto the ground. He gripped the wire in both hands and stood there, making mewling sounds, his clothes torn and soiled, as if he'd been sleeping rough. At first, we ignored him, but having him there was unnerving. I couldn't concentrate on my serve. I thought he was drunk or had learning difficulties, and hoped someone would come and take him away. Chris saw himself as the silverback and went over to talk to him. When he didn't seem to make much progress, the rest of us joined him. Chris asked the guy if he needed help, but he just kept whining and gurgling. I called 911 on my cell, but it went to voicemail after a dozen rings. As we stood there, another visitor shuffled into sight from the direction of town. He had the same pale complexion and red lips, but there was blood on his chin and down the front of his shirt. He looked like the man who ran the hardware store. I took a closer look and realized that he was the guy from the hardware store. We realized something strange was happening. I told the others I was going to the police headquarters about 500 yards away. I walked to my car and Chris padlocked the gate after me. There was a disturbance from the other side of the court. Half a dozen or more weirdos had arrived. They all wore police uniforms, but they were disheveled, with torn shirts, no hats, ties askew, faces bloody. I nearly crapped myself as I jumped in the car and locked the doors. Then the kids from the elementary school arrived. Hundreds of them, tousled, bloody, moving slowly. They surrounded the court and hung on the wire mesh, whimpering and moaning and looking sort of hungry. I drove to the police station and looked around carefully before I got out of the car. The double doors were open. Broken furniture and debris littered the foyer. Somewhere in the depths of the building, an alarm was ringing. I climbed over the front desk and walked through the empty offices until I found the staircase. I worked my way up through the rooms on the next 2 stories to the top floor, searching for somebody, anybody. The door from the stairs to the top level was locked. I hammered hard, and eventually a face appeared, a frightened face, and then another 3. They made me turn around to get a good look at me before they opened the door. "Do you know what's happening?" asked the blonde girl, who I found out later was called Sally. "Not really. But look at that." We could see down into the tennis court from the office window. Marilyn, Chris, and Malcolm were standing back to back in the center of the court, holding their rackets in front of themselves like clubs. The weight of the zombies had flattened the fence, and they were slowly streaming over it. The whole town seemed to be out there. I watched in horrified fascination as the zombies slowly surrounded and overwhelmed my friends. A few minutes later, the mob dispersed, and there was no sign of them. They'd been absorbed. All this was 8 days ago. There are 5 of us up here, me and the 4 clerical workers, Wally, Sally, Brian, and Sheila. We've secured the entrance at ground level and gathered all the food and water we can find. We spent lots of time on the flat roof of the building, vainly waiting for a helicopter to come and rescue us. Water won't be a problem. When the water cooler bottles run out, there are fire tanks up here. It's the food I'm worried about. We haven't got much of it, and small quantities keep disappearing. I'm sure it's that fat bastard Brian who's stealing it. The hot weather reminds me of my time in South Africa, watching the bushmen cutting strips of meat from their kill, then drying it in the sun. They called it biltong. It keeps for months. I look at Brian and think about quietly sliding a biscuit into his pocket and then denouncing him. I have one of the policeman's pistols. All I need is an excuse to use it. Curing Brian is one of the stories in Roger Ley's speculative fiction collection Dead People on Facebook, which has recently been republished with 10 new stories in it. All the stories in the collection have been published, podcast, or broadcast in the last year. Roger also recently released a brand new techno-thriller novella called The Muslim Prince. It's an alternative history that hinges on futuristic surveillance techniques and what might have happened if Princess Diana hadn't died. It's available on Amazon Kindle and has been given good reviews on both Amazon and Goodreads. Also, be sure to check out his brand new book, The Steampunk Adventures of Harry Lampeter, an adventure in a post-apocalyptic steampunk future version of our own world. Links in the description. Hey guys, I hope you got a kick out of that. I thought the ending was quite clever. If you did enjoy it, Roger Ley has a ton of stories on Tall Tale TV, including the first part of his Steampunk Adventures of Harry Lampeter. I'll be sure to drop a link in the description to where you can listen to them all in one place if you'd like. And before you go, be sure to subscribe. This show is available on YouTube, Facebook, and just about every podcast app available. I'm Chris Herron, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.